Sometimes you win by showing you're still willing to fight.
We're gonna do more than that.
First, I have to say, it's kind of hard to give reassurance to a bunch of scared kids trying to escape some very bad people when at least one of them can read your mind and know that you don't actually have a plan, even though you say you have a plan. So if you get to do a season 2, will Tim kind of have to up his game if he's going to spend any time around Luke?
Yes, he definitely will. I think that's one of the things that became more attractive about the show as we went through filming it, though, and as Joe and I got to work together more, and you got to see the dynamic between Luke and Tim and see the things that they do have in common as one fully grown man and one maturing young man. And I think that's a dynamic so often, I think, in TV shows that I love, where you have like a very special character, a unique character, a character who has some kind of perception or foresight or power that can enable them to see the world in a clear way. And then someone who's a little more grounded and cynical, sometimes more physical, sometimes more patient, just to have those, the things that make them similar are interesting. And also the things that make them different are interesting. And I think that is a dynamic that could be really ramped up based on what you just said, if we filmed any more of it.
Yeah, Joe, do you think that Luke will ever leave anyone's thoughts to themselves, or do you think he is someone who will just call people on it when they're not quite being truthful?
Yeah, not while I'm still playing him, that he won't. Yeah, he's always going to be the nosy boy and keep reading everybody's thoughts. But yeah, I'll have to say, I would love a season 2. I would love one. Yeah.
What is the biggest intimidation factor when it comes to taking on a Stephen King story? And specifically with this story, was there anything you wanted to make sure you got right?
Yeah, for me, there was a lot of pressure just coming into it as an inexperienced actor. Like, I was the littlest fish in the biggest pond, so to speak. But yeah, I wanted to try and, because, the only point of reference we have for these characters are Stephen King's words on the page. So I wanted to try and get it as close to his vision as possible, while also bringing to the character what I thought was necessary. Yeah.
There's something about working on something like Stephen King where so many of his stories are so beloved, and so many of his adaptations have been he's probably the most successfully adapted writer ever, and I've loved so many of his films. Most people have at least one of his films in their top 10, in terms of adaptations of his storytelling. And I think, adding your little sprinkling to the Stephen King cinematic universe is there's a pressure on it, but there's also, like, for me, it was just, I hope if Stephen King sees this, he feels like I did justice to his Tim. Do you know what I mean? Like that was the kind of the honest answer for me, because I don't know, I think we all gravitate towards people who are sort of wildly successful in that way, and we're all sort of in awe of them, and so you want them to sort of almost feel pride in what you've done with their story.
Yeah, especially knowing that he wants to actually have his name involved with it. I would imagine that is a little bit of a reassurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe, what was it like for you to step into this series and really lead things for so much of it? Is that something you had been thinking about doing for a while, or have you only thought about doing that more seriously recently? Like, what was just this whole experience like for you in that sense?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to act, like I never thought of anything specific of a project, least of all Stephen King, because it's just so above everything in terms of who it attracts and what it brings to cinema. But yeah, the experience was amazing from start to finish. Not only because it's like, for someone who was out of secondary school, and you know, it was that first bit of independence for me as a newly 18-year-old, and living alone on another continent. Besides all the filming, it was just a great life experience. But the filming itself was just exactly what you need. Because you know, you learn on the job, right? And it's
good to be thrown in at the deep end sometimes.
Yeah, that's why it feels like it doesn't matter if, you know, how much advice you might have gotten from your parents, or just even being around the idea of the industry your entire life probably doesn't help. You probably just have to jump in and
I mean, they can give me all of the wisdom that they can, but when you're really there, you don't know how it's gonna be.
Then so often with characters, we see something happen to them and then we see the effect that has on them. And with this, it's kind of already happened to this character, and we're watching him put himself back together. Yeah. So when it came to him, what did you most identify with? Where did you start with trying to figure him out as far as the journey we see him go on? Because it really is kind of him coming back to himself in a way.
Well, you're spot on. I think that what's interesting and challenging about this show as a viewer is that you're asked to put the pieces together. You have to play a detective along with Tim a little bit, I think, and along with some of the other characters, even though as a viewer, you're one step ahead of him in terms of knowing what's happening in the Institute and seeing all the horrors. But I think I started with the tragedy, the mistake, the shame, all of the heaviness that Tim is bringing into the story at the very beginning. I started there and tried to remind myself every single scene, all the way through to the end, that was a part of him, and that is what weighs him down to the ground. And I think it's easy to forget when you haven't filmed it, but I think also, often I think it's really interesting to meet characters who have a history, who have a past, who have something with them that feels almost secret, even though you find out pretty quickly in the show, like why he is sort of coming across the way that he is, and why he's trying to find peace and a fresh start. But what's more interesting, I think, is to see the humanity and to see the hope and to see the pilot light start to flicker again for him, and to see someone come back to who they are and what they know, and start to sort of fight for what's right again.
You've been so good at playing bad guys, or at least some more morally questionable characters. But was it fun to play a good guy, especially when you are playing someone who does have all those flaws? He's not just a boring hero.
Yeah, I think my concern, I think when I started out acting, I was, the sort of young protagonist a lot. And it was, I definitely like questioned my abilities to keep characters interesting as well as noble. And I think, having played a lot of, untrustworthy, vaguely psychotic, potentially murderous, let's call them anti-heroes. I played a bunch of bad guys. And so, yeah, I was actively looking to try and play someone with a moral compass, someone who I could root for, someone to whom it was important to be a good man and a good influence on the world. And I think that's something I definitely strive at least to do, and it's a quality I very much admire. So that was something to kind of set my sights on, which felt very hopeful in itself.
The way this series and the story is structured is so interesting, because these characters are important to each other, but they're on very separate journeys for quite a lot of this and for quite a while in the story. What was it like to finally get to cross paths with each other? What did you enjoy about finding the dynamic between these two characters once they do finally actually come into each other's lives?
I couldn't wait.
Yeah. I mean, because obviously we'd spent a lot of time together outside of shooting, so it was interesting to finally have to be strangers in front of.
That was actually tricky, where we spent so long getting to know each other and kind of being a support for each other during the first part of filming. When we actually got to shooting scenes together, we had to be reminded that our characters didn't know each other. Because that familiarity is hard to, often when you're shooting a film, lead characters meet near the beginning, and so you don't know each other that well necessarily.
No,
that's something you have to kind of be reminded of.
Yeah, it was interesting, but I think because we would we would go over everything that we needed to do. We had a nice coffee shop, didn't we?
We did. We had a lovely coffee shop. We had an idea of what we wanted their dynamic to be. And I think that was the good thing about spending time together, is that we knew what qualities these characters had in common and what differences they had. And we talked about a lot of that stuff and what their dynamic could be even in the future beyond this series. So we talked about that. So a lot of that, I think we were able to embed a lot of those seeds, you know.
Yeah.
I came up with a line, actually, the last line that is said in the show that you already mentioned earlier in your interview, but I'm not going to in case it's spoilers, but a line about...
Okay, I'll save things till they're
right,
not...
but the line about, you know, get out of my head, stop reading my mind, you know, and that shows an interesting, I think, dynamic for going forwards of like that, where they can have some kind of fun and tension between them.
Yeah, because they do have very little time to build trust with each other. And it feels like it would be easier for Luke to find that trust because he can always just dig around in your head to find it. But
yes,
Tim can't do that in the same way. He just has to decide if he believes all.
Well, he has to rely on his nose and his instincts, which are finely, you know, honed. That's his skill as well. So I think that, you know, superpowers are always emblematic of real powers that we have, aren't they? You know,
because you both go through so much in this, did you find the series more physically challenging or more emotionally challenging?
I think it was more emotionally challenging because it was it's my first gig, so there's
a lot that comes with that.
Yeah, you just have to. I realized very quickly that you need to stay 110% focused at all times, because there's so much going on all the time, you know. So it was just staying from waking up at silly o'clock and going home at silly o'clock. It was like you have to. It's getting into that headspace and staying there. I think that was the hardest thing for me.
Was it fun then to figure out like how to portray like the tests that are being done on him? Because a lot of that seems very physical in kind of odd ways that you wouldn't normally have to figure out how to do yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like because I've been asked this question. I never really know what to say because I didn't really need to. I more just sort of focused on what would you do if you were in that situation? Like how would you react if you were 14 with big beaming lights shining down on you, getting slapped into submission constantly by nasty Tony, just how you would be able to combat the pain and everything, but also what would actually happen to you in that situation.
It really feels like we've only just scratched the tip of the surface for what these characters could do next, what they could find. I mean, we know about other institutes, more kids out there, but it also feels like their journeys, like their very specific journeys, are nowhere near finished. So what would you like to see in a season 2? Like what aspects, either just individually for your own character or these characters together, would you want to explore more?
Well, to be honest, I would love to see more about, because I think we get a little bit into Luke's personal life because, you know, that's the only time outside of Denison that we see in the whole show is the bit in Minneapolis where Luke's with his family and his friends. I think we know about Luke. I'd love to know more about the Tim shooting. I'd love to know more about Miss Sigsbee's background, but also Nikki, Kalisha. Like, I really want to see more character building for those guys for sure, because I feel like Luke's already touched on a lot. Like,
I think if we, you know, obviously it's a complete novel and it's a complete story. I think, but obviously, as you start to familiarize yourself with characters and with their connections and relationships and their weaknesses and strengths, I think that's what's interesting about it for me is, and in all Stephen King, a lot of Stephen King's work anyway, is about challenging the system and about finding the truth in things and also finding hope in each other and in friendship and connection. And I think the most interesting part of the show for me is the dynamic between Tim and Luke. So instead of, you know, looking backwards. I think it'd be interesting to see what the future is for them, and I'd like to see how, you know, in what ways Tim can continue to be, you know, a support and his sort of like grounding adult presence, physical presence in the world, while, you know, to Luke's very special, you know, super qualities of being able to see the world in a certain way and see what's coming. So I'd like to see them dynamic duo it a bit in that way, in the way that we see in, you know, things like Leon the Professional or The Last of Us, or those kind of like slightly older, younger dynamics where one of them is very special. I think, I love those kinds of things. Yeah. So I'd like it to lean that way, but like, that's just pie in the sky nonsense. You know, I have no idea what they want to do or what Stephen King is interested in talking about, or the showrunners. Really, we haven't really talked about it, but I think there's potential in their relationship, in this sort of pseudo dad role.
Yeah, I definitely felt potential and possibilities at the end of the season. So I'm curious, especially with Miss Sigsbee. I feel like she could cause any bit of mischief anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
The lisping man too.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting. It's left with a lot of interesting questions. Well, I appreciate you guys talking to me about it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christina. Cheers.